the wedding dress, and a quiet worry. The rhythmic hum of the treadle sewing machine was a comforting counterpoint to the quiet thrum of Sarah's heart. Sunlight, diffused by the sheer white curtains, painted stripes across the worn wooden floorboards as she guided the ivory chalice beneath the needle. This fabric, soft as a cloud against her fingertips, would soon be her wedding dress. Each stitch, precise and even, was a meditation on her future with Jacob. He was a good man, steady and true, with hands calloused from honest labor and eyes that held a quiet respect for tradition. Their life together would be one of predictable rhythms, of shared chores and Sunday meetings, of children growing up in the embrace of their faith. Yet, a tiny, almost imperceptible knot of disquiet tightened in her chest with each pass of the needle. It wasn't dissatisfaction, not exactly, but a whisper of something unfulfilled, a question she couldn't quite articulate. She pushed it away, focusing instead on the clean lines of the bodice, the delicate gathering of the skirt. Her mother, Rebecca, would approve of its simplicity, its adherence to the ordning. A knock at the back door startled her, pulling her from her thoughts. It was too firm, too deliberate for a neighbor. She heard her father's low rumble, then her mother's more clipped tones. When Rebecca appeared in the doorway of the sewing room, her expression was a careful blend of assessment and welcome. "Sarah, put your sewing away for a moment. Our new hired hand has arrived." Rebecca's gaze flickered to the dress on the table, a subtle reminder of what was expected. "He's an Englisher, but seems a quiet sort. Thomas Miller." Sarah folded the chalice carefully, placing it in its basket before smoothing down her apron. As she stepped into the kitchen, a man stood awkwardly by the table, his cap held in his hands. He was tall, perhaps a few years older than herself, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the small space. His clothes, though simple, were not Amish. A plain work shirt, denim trousers, and sturdy boots. His hair, a dark brown, was neatly cut, and his face, tanned from sun exposure, was lean and angular. What struck Sarah most were his eyes. They were a startling shade of hazel, deep and reflective, and though they held a polite deference, they also seemed to observe everything, missing nothing. When her father, Aaron, introduced them, Thomas offered a small, almost shy nod. "Rebecca, Sarah, this is Thomas. He'll be staying in the small cabin by the barn. Started work at the Miller place over the hill, but they finished with their spring planting early." Aaron's voice was gruff, but not unkind. Rebecca smiled warmly, her usual hospitality shining through. "Welcome, Thomas. We're glad to have you. We'll get you settled and then we can have some supper." Thomas's voice was a low murmur. "Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Yoder." He glanced at Sarah, a fleeting, almost imperceptible dip of his head. There was no lingering, no boldness, just a quick acknowledgement that left Sarah feeling oddly seen. Throughout supper, Thomas ate with a quiet efficiency, speaking only when directly addressed. He answered questions about his previous work and his journey to the valley with brief, succinct phrases. He seemed to carry an air of self-containment, a quiet dignity that was unusual for a transient worker. Sarah found herself stealing glances at him from beneath her bonnet. His hands, she noticed, were strong and capable, not unlike Jacob's, but his movements were less overtly confident, more deliberate, almost thoughtful. After the meal, as Sarah and Rebecca cleared the table, Thomas rose to help Aaron with the evening milking. As he turned to follow her father out the door, his gaze for a split second met Sarah's. It was just an instant, a flicker of hazel light, but in that brief connection, Sarah felt a peculiar jolt, a recognition of something unspoken. He wasn't merely a hired hand. He was a person with his own thoughts, his own quiet world. And for some reason, that simple realization stirred the quiet worry she had felt while sewing, making the thread of her certainty about Jacob unravel just a fraction. It was a fleeting sensation, quickly dismissed, but it was there, a new, subtle shift in the familiar rhythm of the Yoda farm. Mending fences, mending hearts, the sun, already arcing high, etched long shadows as Sarah emerged from the barn, a coil of wire looped over her arm. Thomas was a distant figure by the far pasture, his back to her, intently scrutinizing the splintered post where an overzealous Frisian had leaned. He turned as she approached, his gaze meeting hers, and that familiar current arced between them. Today, it was less a jolt and more a soft hum, a quiet resonance beneath her skin. "Found it," he rumbled, his voice a low thrum. "Looks like a clean break, but the wood's too far gone to simply nail back." "Aye," Sarah agreed, letting the wire clatter to the ground. "We'll need to brace it, and then the strands." She gestured to the snarl of wire that lay sagging. "Ever mended a fence, Thomas?" A faint, rare smile touched his lips. "Can't say I have. My work was more cerebral." "Then today you learn," she declared, a surprising lilt in her tone. She knelt, assessing the damage. "First, we clear the old wire." She handed him a pair of formidable cutters. "Be careful. It's got a kick." They moved in an unbidden harmony, their actions surprisingly synchronized. Sarah demonstrated how to unravel the barbed strands, how to deftly snip the corroded fasteners. His hands, despite their power, were precise as he followed her lead. Once the old wire lay liberated, Sarah unspooled a new roll. "Now, the brace," she explained, holding up a fresh length of timber. "This will shore up the old post, then we'll wrap the wire around both. It needs to be taut, or the cows will test it again." Her nimble fingers threaded the wire through a pre-drilled hole in the new wood. "You try." She extended the wire to him, her fingers brushing his in a fleeting contact. A sudden warmth blossomed in Sarah's palm, swiftly migrating up her arm, a sensation both novel and oddly inviting. Thomas's eyes flickered to hers, a momentary deepening of their hazel pools, before he redirected his focus to the task. He fumbled slightly at first, his large hands seeming cumbersome with the slender wire. Sarah leaned in, her voice a murmur. "Like this. Hold it firm, then twist. Not too hard, or it'll snap." She guided his hand, her knuckles grazing his thumb. This time, the warmth intensified. A quiet thrumming that resonated deep within her. She withdrew swiftly, a blush creeping up her cheeks, unconnected to the sun's heat. They continued in a companionable quiet. The only sounds the metallic ping of wire, a bird's distant chirrup, and the faraway lowing of a cow. Thomas quickly mastered the technique, his movements growing surer, more efficient. He remained largely silent, yet his calm presence was an unexpected ballast. Sarah found herself unwinding beside him, a sense of ease settling over her that she hadn't realized she lacked. As the sun began its descent, painting the fields in a molten gold, the fence stood resolute once more. Sarah stepped back, admiring their handiwork. "Good job, Thomas." He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, a faint smudge of dirt accenting his cheek. "You're a good teacher, Sarah." His eyes met hers again, and for a suspended moment, the world contracted to just the two of them, the freshly mended fence a silent testament to their shared endeavor. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a recognition that transcended words. Walking back towards the barn, a soft breeze rustled through the cornfields. Sarah felt a new buoyancy in her step, a quiet contentment that hummed beneath the surface of her thoughts. The residual warmth from their brief touches lingered in her hand, a subtle echo of the unexpected connection that had sparked between them. It was a novel feeling, this gentle warmth, one that bore no relation to the summer sun or the steady companionship of Jacob. It was something else entirely, something both thrilling and faintly unsettling. She knew, with a sudden clarity, that the fence wasn't the only thing that had begun to mend today. Barn roof whispers. The persistent drip from the barn roof had graduated from an annoyance to a genuine concern with the last downpour. Sarah, ever observant, had spotted the telltale darkened wood on the hayloft floor during morning chores. Today the sun was a welcome, if deceptive, presence, promising a dry spell long enough to tackle the repair. Thomas, with a hammer slung from his belt and a coil of tar paper under his arm, followed her up the creaking ladder. The scent of sun-baked shingles and dry hay filled the air. From this vantage point, the farm spread out beneath them like a miniature quilt, neat rows of corn, the gentle curve of the creek, and the distant glint of the buggy path leading to town. He moved with a quiet efficiency, assessing the damage with a practiced eye Sarah hadn't expected from a man of cerebral work. "Looks like a few loose shingles here," he rumbled, his voice low against the expansive quiet of the afternoon. He pointed with a gloved hand to a section near the ridgeline. "And this bit of flashing has come away." Sarah nodded, clutching a handful of roofing nails. "We've had that patch before. Papa always says it's a tricky spot." He knelt, the sun catching the subtle reddish tones in his dark hair. Tricky, but not impossible. His movements were deliberate, his broad shoulders shifting as he pried loose a damaged shingle. The sharp, acrid smell of hot tar rose as he unrolled a section of new paper. For a long while, their only sounds were the rhythmic tap of the hammer, the rustle of the tar paper, and the occasional creak of the old barn. The physical intimacy of their shared labor, high above the world, created a unique pocket of quiet. Sarah found herself watching his hands, strong and capable, as they worked. She handed him nails when he needed them, their fingers brushing fleetingly, a spark of something almost electric passing between them. "Weather's holding," she offered, breaking the comfortable silence. It felt strange to speak, a minor disruption to the steady rhythm they had found. He looked up, his hazel eyes catching the light. For now, weathermen are predicting more rain by week's end. "Always something to worry about with the crops," Sarah mused, thinking of the young corn needing a good soaking, but not too much. Too much sun, then too much rain. It's a balance. Thomas nodded, resuming his work. "Like everything, I suppose. There's a balance in the city too, though it's a different kind of balance. Less about sun and rain, more about pace." He paused, almost as if weighing the words. "And noise." She considered that, her gaze drifting over the peaceful fields. "I imagine it's very noisy." "It can be," he confirmed, "but there are quiet spots, if you know where to look." Their conversation flowed in gentle eddies, touching on the simplicity of farm life against the unseen complexities of the world beyond. They spoke of the merits of different corn varieties, the upcoming harvest, and the best way to mend a broken gatepost. Nothing profound, yet each shared word felt like a tiny thread weaving them closer together. Sarah felt a peculiar lightness in her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with the height they were at. She found herself looking forward to these daily interactions with a mix of guilt and fervent curiosity. Each morning, she would try to guess what task Thomas might be assigned, her heart giving a little flutter of anticipation. It was wrong, she knew. She was to marry Samuel. Yet, this easy camaraderie with Thomas, the quiet understanding that blossomed between them with each shared task, was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was a warmth, a steady glow that settled deep within her, challenging the familiar contours of her world. As the last shingle was nailed down and the leak secured, a comfortable silence settled between them, charged with unspoken connections. The barn roof, once a symbol of trouble, now held the lingering whispers of a burgeoning secret. A wooden bird's secret. The nascent morning sun, tentative and pale, seeped through Sarah's window, streaking the worn sill with watery gold. Reaching to part the curtain, her fingers brushed against something cool and smooth. Her gaze fell. There, nestled amidst the dancing dust motes, rested a diminutive wooden bird. No larger than her thumb, it was meticulously carved from a luminous, almost cream-coloured wood. Its wings were subtly unfurled, captured mid-flight, with tiny, near-invisible lines suggesting individual feathers. The delicate beak, slightly parted, conjured the image of a silent, nascent melody. There were no sharp angles, no clumsy cuts, only the graceful, flowing contours of a master craftsman's hand. Sarah picked it up, her thumb tracing the sleek curve of its back. An undeniable certainty settled over her. Thomas had left it. A jolt, akin to the one she felt whenever his hazel eyes met hers, electrified her. It was a wordless offering, a private message exchanged without a single sound. His quiet devotion, his steadfast presence during the barn repairs, now manifested in this tiny, palpable form. The bird felt impossibly precious in her palm, a fragile testament to the unspoken current that had begun to entwine their lives. A blush crept up her neck, despite her solitude. This transcended a shared laugh over a clumsy hammer swing. It was an intimacy that ventured beyond the confines of her prearranged existence, a secret, both warm and perilous. With a swift glance at the closed bedroom door, Sarah hurried to her hope chest, a sturdy oak box brimming with quilts and linens destined for her future home with Jacob. She lifted a neatly folded quilt, its vibrant patchwork a testament to hours of patient stitching, and tucked the wooden bird deep within the soft layers. It was a surreptitious act, a symbol concealed from the world's prying eyes, yet its presence kindled a strange, quiet joy within her. Later that afternoon, the familiar rumble of Jacob's buggy heralded his arrival. Sarah felt a faint flutter in her stomach, but it was a different sensation than the wooden bird had evoked. This was the steady thrum of obligation, of an expected path. Jacob was diligent, kind, and entirely suitable. Everything she had been raised to anticipate in a husband. Yet, the memory of Thomas's quiet strength, the way his eyes seemed to pierce beyond her dutiful facade, lingered. Jacob met her on the porch, his smile earnest. "Sarah, good to see you." He held a small, carefully folded drawing. "I've been sketching out some ideas for the new barn we'll be needing. Thought you'd want to see them." He spread the paper across the porch railing, his finger tracing lines. "We'll want the stalls facing south, for the winter sun, and a good-sized hayloft, of course." He spoke with a quiet assurance, his vision for their future farm clear and practical. Sarah nodded, offering polite affirmations, her gaze following the robust lines of his drawings. She admired his forethought, his dedication. He would be a good provider, a respected pillar of their community. But as he described the layout of the milking parlour, her mind drifted. She imagined Thomas, his sleeves rolled up, the muscles in his forearms flexing as he worked. She heard the echo of his low chuckle, saw the glint in his hazel eyes when he caught her watching him. The vividness of these internal images caused Jacob's earnest voice to recede into a distant hum. "What do you think, Sarah?" Jacob asked, his voice pulling her back. She blinked, focusing on the drawing. "It looks very good, Jacob. Very practical." The words felt hollow, even to her own ears. A small carved wooden bird, hidden deep in her hope chest, felt more real, more vital than the grand plans for a future that suddenly seemed a distant, almost foreign country. Under the old oak tree. The late morning sun, a warm balm on her shoulders, filtered through the leaves of the ancient oak at the edge of the east field. Sarah had packed 2 lunches, her usual simple fare of bread, cheese, and a ripe apple carefully wrapped in linen. Thomas was already there, leaning against the gnarled trunk, his wide-brimmed hat tilted back, revealing the strong line of his jaw. He rose as she approached, a quiet courtesy that always struck her. The air hummed with the lazy drone of bees in the nearby clover and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk. "Afternoon, Sarah," he said, his voice a low rumble that always sent a shiver down her spine, though she kept her expression serene. "Thomas," she replied, offering him one of the bundles. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that felt like a spark. He took the lunch, his hazel eyes, the colour of wet earth and distant forests, meeting hers. There was a depth in them she hadn't encountered before, a knowing gaze that seemed to see past her quiet exterior. They sat cross-legged on the soft grass, the oak's shade a welcome respite from the intensifying sun. The silence between them was not empty, but comfortable, filled with the rustling leaves and the gentle crunch of their own eating. Sarah found herself observing him, the way his strong hands broke the bread, the thoughtful chew of his jaw. He was unlike anyone she had ever known, an island of stillness in a world that often felt loud with expectation. "This is a good spot," Thomas said, breaking the quiet. He gestured to the sprawling branches above them. "Always liked old trees." "Me too," Sarah murmured, a small smile touching her lips. "This one's seen a lot, I imagine. My gross-daddy used to say it was here before his gross-daddy." Thomas nodded, a small, genuine smile gracing his own lips. "They're like silent keepers of time, aren't they? Holding on to stories." He took another bite of his apple, the crisp snap loud in the stillness. "What kind of stories do you hope to live, Sarah?" The question caught her by surprise. No one had ever asked her that, not in such a direct, open way. Jacob spoke of future plans, the acreage he'd buy, the new barn they'd build, the children they'd raise in the traditional way. But dreams, hopes, those were private things, usually unspoken, assumed to follow the well-trodden path. She thought of the wooden bird hidden in her hope chest, a silent testament to a different kind of longing. I suppose I hope for peace," she began, her voice soft. "And to see things grow. Not just crops, but understanding." She glanced at him, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "And you, Thomas? What do you hope for?" He leaned back against the trunk, his gaze distant, fixed on the horizon where the fields met the distant woods. "I hope to build something true," he said slowly, his voice laced with a quiet intensity. "Something that lasts, not just in wood and stone, but in spirit. A place where honest work is valued, and kindness isn't a luxury." He turned his eyes back to her, and the intensity deepened, making her breath catch. "A place where you can feel connected, truly connected to the land and to the people around you." His words resonated deep within her, echoing a yearning she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. It wasn't just about a farm or a family. It was about something deeper, a sense of belonging that felt spiritual. She realized with a jolt that this was the connection she felt with him, this quiet understanding, this shared landscape of their souls. It was a connection that transcended words, a recognition of kindred spirits. "That sounds beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The air between them thrummed with unspoken sentiments, a tangible current that pulled them closer. She felt an intimacy she had never experienced, not with Jacob, not with anyone. It was a vulnerability that was both frightening and exhilarating. Under the ancient oak, with its silent stories, Sarah felt a profound shift within her, a quiet awakening to a truth she could no longer deny. The path laid out before her suddenly seemed less certain, overshadowed by the burgeoning landscape of her heart. The knowing look. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fields, painting the ripening wheat a deep gold. Sarah, her bonnet slightly askew, wiped a stray wisp of hair from her brow, a faint sheen of perspiration on her upper lip. The air, thick with the scent of freshly cut hay and blooming clover, hummed with the industrious drone of bees. She and Thomas were mending a section of fence near the edge of the property, a task that required a surprising amount of coordination. Thomas, his shirt sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms, held a splintered post steady, while Sarah hammered in a new nail with practiced, rhythmic blows. A brief, unexpected gust of wind caught Sarah's bonnet, threatening to send it spiraling into the tall grass. She instinctively reached out, stumbling slightly. Thomas, with an agile grace that belied his solid build, caught her arm, his touch firm and steady. Their eyes met, and a shared laugh bubbled up, light and free, scattering the quiet intensity of their work. It was a sound that carried easily on the gentle breeze, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the distant lowing of cattle. Unbeknownst to them, the sound carried further than the fields. Across the narrow dirt lane, Mrs. Stoltzfus, an avid gardener with an even more avid interest in her neighbours' affairs, paused in her weeding. Her gnarled fingers, stained with earth, stilled their plucking of dandelions. She straightened slowly, a thin, almost imperceptible frown deepening the lines around her mouth. Her gaze, sharp and unblinking, fixed on the figures at the fence line. Thomas, his head thrown back, a rare, uninhibited smile transforming his usually serious face, was a sight she had never witnessed before. And Sarah, her own laughter echoing his, her face bright with an unreserved joy, seemed to Mrs. Stoltzfus entirely too comfortable. Mrs. Stoltzfus watched for a long moment, the quiet tableau speaking volumes to her. The easy camaraderie, the shared mirth, the way Thomas's hand lingered on Sarah's arm for just a fraction of a second longer than strictly necessary. It was all laid bare, clear as the afternoon sky. She sniffed, a barely audible sound that nonetheless conveyed a wealth of disapproval. Later that evening, as Sarah walked the familiar path home from the barn, the scent of fresh milk clinging to her apron, she saw Mrs. Stoltzfus emerge from her kitchen, a basket of cooling bread clutched to her chest. Their paths intersected at the communal pump where Sarah intended to draw water for the evening meal. "Good evening, Sarah," Mrs. Stoltzfus offered, her voice a little too sweet, a little too measured. "Evening, Mrs. Stoltzfus," Sarah replied, a polite smile on her lips, but a sudden, inexplicable tightening in her stomach. Mrs. Stoltzfus's gaze swept over Sarah, lingering for a moment on the faint flush still on Sarah's cheeks, a lingering ghost of the afternoon's laughter. Then, her eyes met Sarah's, and held. It was a long, silent look, devoid of anger, yet heavy with a weight that made Sarah's breath catch. It was a look that understood, a look that knew, a look that judged without uttering a single word. There was a subtle tilt to Mrs. Stoltzfus's chin, a slight pursing of her lips, a silent pronouncement of concern, of observation, of a transgression noted. The unspoken message hung in the air between them, thick and palpable. Sarah felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine, a sudden cold awareness that her burgeoning connection with Thomas, once a secret held close to her heart, was no longer invisible. It had been seen, it had been observed, and it had been marked. The ease she had felt with Thomas, the boundless joy, now seemed tinged with a new, unsettling vulnerability. Sarah managed a weak nod, her smile faltering, The water she drew from the pump felt icy cold against her hands, a sharp contrast to the sudden warmth that bloomed in her cheeks. She hurried away, the heavy pail swinging gently, the knowing look of Mrs. Stoltzfus burning in her mind. The tranquility of the evening, the peaceful descent of dusk, suddenly felt brittle, fragile. The world, once solely hers and Thomas's, was now open to interpretation, to scrutiny, to the quiet, watchful eyes of the community. The whispers, she knew, would begin. Whispers on the wind. Sunday's post-service air, typically a soothing balm of quiet reverence, hung heavy with unspoken tension. As Sarah walked beside her younger sister, the familiar cadence of their footsteps faltered, echoing the shift in the atmosphere. Heads, moments ago bowed in prayer, now lifted with an almost imperceptible delay as she passed. The usual post-service chatter, a gentle hum of shared recipes and family news, dissipated into hushed tones, only to revive with renewed, almost urgent energy once she was out of earshot. It was a symphony of whispers, a rustling of leaves on a wind only she truly felt. The sensation intensified later that week at the market. Mrs. Stoltzfus, her blue eyes sharp beneath her corp, surveyed Sarah at the produce stall as if searching for a misplaced stitch. Her silence resonated louder than any accusation. Other women, their faces a blend of curiosity and apprehension, offered fleeting smiles that never quite reached their eyes. A knot began to coil in Sarah's stomach, cinching tighter with each averted glance and half-finished sentence. The vibrant blue fabric she'd chosen for a new dress suddenly felt too bold, too conspicuous as she completed her purchase. The community's collective gaze pressed down, an invisible, crushing burden. Back in the quiet sanctuary of their farmhouse, the unspoken tension permeated the air. Rebecca, usually a whirlwind of efficient kitchen movement, now kneaded dough with subdued grace, her rhythm slower, more deliberate. She observed Sarah across the scrubbed pine table, where her daughter meticulously shelled peas, movements precise, but lacking their usual fluidity. "Sarah, child," Rebecca finally ventured, her voice soft as worn linen. "Is everything all right?" Her gaze, warm and knowing, settled on Sarah. It was a look Sarah recognized, from childhood scraped knees, from lost fair ribbons, from the nascent apprehension of her impending marriage to Jacob. But this time, an added layer of concern, a subtle crease between her brows, spoke of unspoken worries. Sarah's fingers stilled over the bowl. The gentle question illuminated the turmoil churning within her. How could she articulate the feeling of eyes on her back, the sting of implied judgment, the unsettling sense that her life was no longer entirely her own? How could she explain the quiet joy she found in Thomas's presence, a joy now tainted by communal disapproval? "Yes, Mama," she replied, her voice a little too thin, a little too quick. She picked up another pea pod, her thumbnail digging into the seam. "Everything is fine." Rebecca sighed, a soft sound barely disturbing the kitchen's quiet. She paused from her dough, wiping her hands on her apron before sitting opposite Sarah. The rich scent of yeast and flour clung to her. "I have heard murmurs, Sarah, about the Englisher." She chose her words carefully, her gaze unwavering. "The community. They notice things, especially when a young woman is soon to be wed." The knot in Sarah's stomach tightened, an internal pull. It wasn't an accusation, not exactly, but an undeniable statement of fact. Her mother's concern was genuine, rooted in a desire to protect her daughter and their family's standing. Yet it also highlighted the inescapable truth. Her growing connection with Thomas was no longer private. It was a story being woven and rewoven, embellished with each whispered retelling, carried on the very wind that rustled through their cornfields. "He helps on the farm, Mama," Sarah murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "He works hard." It sounded hollow even to her own ears. It failed to convey the laughter shared over a mended fence, the shared glance over a steaming cup of coffee, the quiet understanding that had blossomed between them. It failed to explain the quickening of her heart at his sight, or the strange ache she felt in his absence. Rebecca reached across the table, her hand covering Sarah's, her touch warm and reassuring. "I know he does, child. But people, they see more than just work. They see what they want to see, or what they fear to see. And for a young woman of our faith, honor is everything." Her eyes, usually so calm, held a flicker of apprehension. "Jacob is a good man, Sarah. A steady man. Your future with him is secure, blessed." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, her mother's strong, work-worn fingers a familiar comfort. The path ahead, charted since childhood, had always seemed clear, bright with the promise of a peaceful, God-fearing life. Now that path felt obscured, shadowed by the whispers on the wind and the unsettling beat of her own conflicted heart. The decision, she realized, was no longer just about her. It was about her family, their reputation, and the very fabric of the community she had always called home. Jacob's confrontation. The late afternoon sun, usually a gentle balm, felt like an interrogator's lamp as Sarah shelled peas on the porch swing. Each sharp crack of a pod seemed to tighten the band around her chest. She spotted him before he even dismounted his buggy. Jacob. His approach was subtly altered today, the customary confident stride, replaced by a more deliberate, almost hesitant gait. He tied the reins to the post with practiced efficiency, yet the cheerful whistle that often accompanied the task was conspicuously absent. Sarah's hands froze, a half-shelled pea pod clutched between her fingers. Her mother's words from yesterday, sharp and laced with a mother's fear, echoed in her mind. "Our good name, Sarah. Consider your future." Jacob ascended the porch steps, his shadow stretching long and dark across her lap. His eyes, typically warm and reassuring, held a bewildered intensity that knotted her stomach. He didn't sit. He didn't offer his usual soft greeting. Instead, he simply stood before her, hands clasped behind his back, his shoulders squared. The air between them hummed with an unspoken tension. "Sarah," he began, his voice surprisingly firm, though a tremor betrayed the depth of his agitation. "There are rumors." The word hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Sarah's gaze instinctively dropped to the bowl of peas, the vibrant green a stark counterpoint to the sudden grayness she felt inside. A flush crept up her cheeks, a telltale signal of her guilt. "Rumors," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. It was a flimsy shield, even to her own ears. Jacob took a step closer, his eyes searching hers with an almost painful earnestness. "About you. And the Englisher." He articulated Englisher with a careful precision, as if the word itself were an alien object on his tongue. "They say you spend too much time with him, that you look at him in ways you shouldn't." His brow furrowed, a crease of genuine confusion marring his usually placid expression. "Is it true, Sarah?" The directness of his question pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. Her fingers trembled, scattering a few shelled peas onto the worn wooden planks. How could she reply? How could she articulate the quiet understanding that had bloomed between her and Thomas, the way his steady presence had begun to reorient her world, without shattering Jacob's trust, without admitting to a betrayal she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself? The immense weight of her duty, her years of quiet obedience, pressed down upon her. She saw, in Jacob's pained gaze, the collective expectation of their entire community. She saw the years of planning, a future meticulously laid out like a quilt, each stitch a promise. Jacob was a good man, steadfast and true. He offered a life of security, of belonging, of everything she had been raised to desire. But then Thomas. His reserved smile, the shared glance over a half-finished fence post, the unexpected grace in his calloused hands. He had stirred something within her, a yearning she hadn't known existed, a quiet rebellion against the predictable cadence of her life. She looked up at Jacob, his face etched with a hurt that twisted her heart. He deserved honesty, but the truth felt like a sword. "Jacob," she began, her voice hoarse. I don't know what to say." His jaw tightened. "Don't you, or won't you? I thought we were clear, Sarah. Our marriage is set. Our lives are interwoven." He gestured vaguely between them, as if tracing the invisible threads of their shared future. "What is it about him? What could he offer you that I cannot?" The question was devoid of anger, but steeped in bewildered pain, a profound sense of injury. Sarah's breath hitched. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the unwavering belief in their shared path. And she saw the fissure she had introduced into it. The scent of drying hay from the distant fields, normally a comforting aroma, now felt cloying, suffocating. The buzzing of a lone fly near the screen door seemed deafening in the silence that stretched between them. A deafening clash raged within her, the steadfast devotion she owed Jacob, the expectations of her family, the looming judgment of her community, all warring with the nascent, dangerous blossoming of her feelings for Thomas. She knew, with chilling certainty, that her answer to Jacob, or her continued silence, would chart an irreversible course. The predictable life she'd known was fracturing, and she was poised at the precipice, teetering between two worlds. "Jacob, please," she whispered, the words catching in her throat, unable to articulate the storm raging inside her. The truth felt too vast, too devastating to speak aloud. A sad farewell. The air around the farm had thickened, not with the usual summer humidity, but with an unspoken tension that pressed down on Sarah. Jacob's visit had been a catalyst, solidifying the rumors into something undeniable, palpable. She noticed the way her mother's eyes lingered on her a moment too long, a silent question in their depths. Her father, usually so quick with a jest, had grown quieter, his gaze often drifting towards Thomas, who continued his work with unwavering diligence, yet with a subtle shift in his demeanor. Thomas, too, had changed. The easy camaraderie that had once flowed between them, born of shared labor and quiet understanding, was now fractured by a new reserve. His hazel eyes, once so direct and open when they met hers, now held a guarded quality, a shadow of an unvoiced sorrow. He still worked tirelessly, his strong hands moving with practiced efficiency, but the slight humming he sometimes did, a low, tuneless melody, had ceased. He ate his meals at the family table, but his contributions to the conversation, always sparse, had dwindled to almost nothing. He seemed to shrink into himself, becoming a man of muted movements and silent observation. Sarah felt the shift acutely. The invisible thread that had connected them, woven from shared glances and unspoken words, felt stretched and thin, threatening to snap. She caught glimpses of the other farmhands, their whispers ceasing abruptly when she drew near, their eyes flicking from her to Thomas and back again. The community's disapproval, once a distant rumble, was now a constant hum, vibrating in the very ground beneath her feet. It was in the way the women at the market fair averted their gazes in the sudden silence that fell when she entered a room at a gathering. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down relentlessly on the fields, Sarah found Thomas by the barn, meticulously oiling a plough. The air was thick with the scent of hot earth and machine grease. She approached him cautiously, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. "Thomas!" Her voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the vast quiet of the afternoon. He straightened slowly, turning to face her. The sunlight caught the golden flecks in his eyes, but they held a weariness she hadn't seen before. A faint tremor ran through her at the sight of his shadowed expression. He wiped his hands on a rag, his gaze sweeping over her face, taking in the worry etched there. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, a sound of gravel and resignation. A beat of silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. She watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. I reckon I'll be moving on soon," he said, his voice barely audible above the chirping of crickets. The words hung in the humid air, sudden and sharp, like a glass breaking in a quiet room. Sarah felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She had known, in the deepest, most secret part of her heart, that this day would come. The signs had been too clear, the pressure too immense. Yet, hearing the words spoken aloud, so matter-of-factly, ripped through her with unexpected force. A sudden, sharp pang of despair seized her. The world seemed to tilt, the vibrant colors of the afternoon fading to a dull gray. His gaze, when it met hers, was filled with a profound sadness that mirrored her own. There was no anger, no accusation, only a deep, aching sorrow that seemed to emanate from him, wrapping around her like a shroud. He didn't offer an explanation, didn't try to soften the blow with platitudes. He simply stated the inevitable, his eyes conveying the unspoken weight of the choice, the impossible circumstances that had led them to this precipice. She couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight, a knot of emotion constricting her windpipe. The loss, sudden and imminent, felt like a physical blow. The thought of his absence, the silence that would replace his quiet presence, the emptiness of the fields without his steady form, was a gaping void in her future. She looked at his hands, calloused and strong, the hands that had worked alongside hers, that had helped build so much this summer, and felt a wave of profound sorrow wash over her. He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent farewell already passing between them. The promise of unspoken words, of a future that would never be, hung heavy in the air, a burden they both carried. Then, with a soft sigh that seemed to carry the weight of everything, he looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly. He picked up the plough handles, a signal she understood that the conversation was over, and the work, like their lives, must continue. The accelerated wedding. The late afternoon sun, usually a welcome golden balm, felt harsh and intrusive as it streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah stood by the counter, mechanically kneading dough for supper rolls, the rhythmic thump-thump of her hands a counterpoint to the rapid beat of her heart. Mama, her face etched with a familiar weariness that had deepened these past weeks, sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly. Jacob had departed earlier that morning, but his visit, like a stone dropped into still water, had sent ripples far and wide. "Sarah, sit down, child." Mama's voice, usually a soft murmur, held an uncharacteristic edge of command. Sarah wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and pulled out a chair opposite her mother. The smell of yeast and impending supper usually brought comfort. Today, it felt cloying. Mama took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond Sarah's shoulder. "Your Da and I, we've talked, with the bishop and with Jacob's family." The words hung in the air, heavy and thick. Sarah's stomach clenched. She knew, with a dreadful certainty, what was coming. "The wedding," Mama continued, her voice gaining a quiet determination. "It will be moved up to the second Saturday of next month." The announcement, though anticipated, still hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. The second Saturday. That was barely 3 weeks away. Her breath caught in her throat. She had always imagined a slow, deliberate approach to her wedding, a gradual unfolding of preparations, a time to mentally prepare for the momentous change. Now, it was being rushed, pushed, like a cart careening downhill. "Mama," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. That's so soon." Rebecca finally met her daughter's eyes, and Sarah saw a flicker of her own pain reflected there, quickly veiled by resolve. "We have no choice, Sarah. The whispers. They've grown too loud. Too many questions are being asked. Jacob's reputation, our family's good name, they're being sullied." Her gaze hardened, a silent plea for understanding. "We need to set things right, to put an end to the talk, to show the community that all is as it should be." Sarah looked down at her hands, knotting them in her lap. The whispers were about Thomas, about her, about the unspoken connection that had bloomed under the very eaves of their home. The accelerated wedding wasn't just about quelling rumours, it was a public declaration, a forceful reassertion of order, a final severing of any lingering threads between her and the Englisher. It was a race against time, not to find happiness, but to bury a truth. "Jacob is understanding," Mama added, as if to soften the blow. "He's a good man, Sarah. He's willing to do what's necessary to bring peace back." Peace. The word felt like a hollow mockery. What peace could there be when her own heart felt fractured? She imagined Thomas, far away by now, a phantom in her mind, his quiet understanding, his unexpected laughter. The thought of him brought a fresh wave of grief, sharp and unbidden. "Preparations will begin immediately," Mama continued, her voice taking on a more practical tone, as if outlining a baking recipe. "We'll need to send out the announcements quickly. You'll need to speak with Hannah about your dress. And we'll start preparing the house for the gathering." Sarah nodded mutely, her head swimming. The list of tasks, usually comforting in its familiarity, now felt like a chain tightening around her. Each item was a step further away from the life she had briefly, dangerously considered, and a step closer to a future she had always accepted, but now dreaded. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second marking the relentless march towards a decision she hadn't truly made. The choice was no longer a quiet, internal struggle. It was being forced upon her by the calendar, by the expectations of her community, by the protective yet suffocating love of her family. The weight of it pressed down on her, leaving her feeling breathless, trapped. She was standing at the precipice, and the only path visible was the one leading directly to Jacob, to the life that had always been hers, now stripped of any gentle transition, any soft farewell. The choice in the barn, the scent of dried hay and damp earth clung to the evening air as Sarah pushed open the heavy barn door. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that echoed in her ears, louder than the rustle of straw underfoot. The last rays of the setting sun, filtered through dusty panes high on the barn wall, cast long, distorted shadows across the stalls. She knew he would be here, finishing up the evening chores, a silent, dependable presence. This was it. There was no more time for hesitation, no more space for the quiet surrender that had always defined her. She found Thomas in the far stall, forking fresh hay into the manger for the milk cows. His back was to her, broad and solid, the denim of his shirt stretched taut across his shoulders. The rhythmic scrape of the pitchfork against the wooden floor was the only sound for a moment, a steady counterpoint to her internal chaos. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry, and took a deep breath, the smell of horses and hay filling her lungs. "Thomas." Her voice, when it came, was a reedy whisper, barely audible above the rustling of the hay. He paused, the pitchfork suspended mid-air, then slowly turned. His hazel eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of surprise, then something softer, more knowing, as they met hers. He leaned the pitchfork against the stall wall and wiped his hands on his trousers, a small, unconscious gesture that spoke of his quiet diligence. "Sarah," he acknowledged, his voice a low rumble that always sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't ask what she needed, simply waited, his gaze steady, patient. She walked closer, her steps deliberate, her mind a whirlwind of fear and a fierce, burning resolve. The image of Mama's tear-streaked face, the hurried words about the wedding, Jacob's possessive stare, it all coalesced into a suffocating weight. But beneath it, a tiny, defiant flame had ignited. "Mama." "She moved the wedding," Sarah began, her voice still trembling, but gaining a fragile strength. She watched his face for a reaction, but Thomas's expression remained unreadable, a mask of calm. 3 weeks. They moved it to 3 weeks from now. A small muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign that he had registered her words, that the news had pierced his usual composure. He shifted his weight, his gaze dropping to the worn floorboards for a brief moment before lifting back to hers, intense and searching. Sarah took another shaky breath, clutching her hands together, her knuckles white. This was the precipice. This was the moment she had to leap. "I cannot marry him, Thomas." The words hung in the air, echoing in the quiet barn, stark and profound. They felt foreign on her tongue, an act of rebellion so immense it both terrified and exhilarated her. She watched Thomas, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm, waiting for him to recoil, to tell her she was mad, to turn away. But he didn't. Instead, a subtle change softened his features. The guardedness in his eyes eased, replaced by a tenderness that made her own eyes prick with unshed tears. He took a step towards her, slowly, deliberately, as if giving her every opportunity to retreat. "Sarah," he said again, his voice deeper now, almost a caress. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently closing around her trembling hand. His touch was warm, solid, and utterly grounding. It was a silent promise, an unspoken acknowledgement of the impossible choice she had just made, of the path she had just forged in the face of everything she had ever known. In that touch, in the quiet understanding in his gaze, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, even amidst the terrifying uncertainty. She had chosen. She had chosen love over duty, her own heart over the expectations of her community, and as Thomas's thumb gently stroked the back of her hand, she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that she had chosen well. The world outside the barn might rage, but within its dusty walls, a different future had just begun to bloom. A new path. The scent of beeswax polish and old wood filled the Yoda's parlor, a smell that had always signified safety and an unchanging world. Today it felt like a silent judgment. Sarah sat on the edge of a straight-backed chair, her hands folded in her lap, the rough-spun fabric of her dress a familiar rasp against her skin. Across from her, Jacob sat stiffly beside Preacher Lehman, his face a mask of wounded confusion. Her father, his usually jovial expression replaced by a stern line, stood by the mantel, while her mother, Rebecca, sat beside him, her knitting needles still in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed. 3 other church elders, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and disapproval, occupied the remaining chairs. "Sarah," Preacher Lehman's voice was gentle, yet carried the weight of his office. "We are here to understand. Your mother tells us you wish to break your engagement to Jacob. Is this true?" Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. She looked at Jacob first, seeing the betrayal in his eyes, the set of his jaw. A pang of guilt, sharp and swift, pierced her. She had caused him pain, and that was never her intention. But the conviction she'd found with Thomas pulsed beneath her ribs, a steady, warm current. "Yes, Preacher Lehman," she said, her voice a little shaky but clear. "It is true." A collective sigh, heavy with disappointment, rippled through the room. Her mother's hand went to her mouth. "And why, child?" her father asked, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. "Jacob is a good man, a hard-working man. He is respected. This is a match blessed by God and community." Sarah took a deep breath. "He is a good man, Vata, and I respect him." She glanced at Jacob again. "But my heart is not in this marriage. It is not fair to him, nor to me, to enter into such a sacred union without true devotion." The words felt inadequate, a pale shadow of the complex storm inside her, but they were the only ones she could offer. She couldn't speak of Thomas, not directly, not here. Preacher Lehman leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "True devotion, Sarah, can grow. Love is a choice, not merely a feeling. It is built on shared faith, on commitment, on the promise before God." "I understand that, preacher," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. "But the foundation must be there. I cannot make that promise, not truly, not to Jacob." Her gaze swept across the faces of the elders, each reflecting a shade of dismay. "I am sorry to cause such upset. I know this brings shame upon my family, but I cannot live a lie." Rebecca Yoder finally spoke, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Sarah, think of what you are doing. This will be the talk of the market. What will people say? Our good name." "I know, ma'am," Sarah whispered, her heart aching for her mother's distress. "And I am so sorry. But I must be true to myself, even if it brings difficulty." Jacob, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice low and tight. "Sarah, is there another?" His gaze was direct, unwavering. Sarah flinched. The air in the room thickened, suddenly heavy with unspoken accusations. She looked at the polished floorboards, unable to meet his eyes. To lie would be to betray Thomas, to betray the fragile hope that had taken root within her. To tell the truth would be to confirm their worst suspicions. "My reasons are my own, Jacob," she said, her voice barely audible. "They are about my heart and my future." It was not a denial, nor an admission, but the truth in its most distilled form. A silence descended, heavy and final. Preacher Lehman sighed, a sound of resignation. "We will pray for you, Sarah, and for Jacob. This is a grave decision, one that will have repercussions." He rose, signaling the end of the meeting. The elders followed suit, their expressions grim. As they filed out, Rebecca pulled Sarah into a tight embrace, her body trembling. "Oh, my daughter, what have you done?" she whispered, tears dampening Sarah's bonnet. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of her small room, Sarah moved with a determined efficiency. The afternoon sun, usually a comforting presence, cast long, accusatory shadows. She opened her hope chest, not to take out items for her wedding, but to select a few simple necessities. A change of clothes, her worn leather-bound Bible, the small wooden bird Thomas had carved for her. She ran her thumb over its smooth, cool surface, a tangible link to a future she was choosing, one step at a time. The small bag filled quickly. She looked around the room, at the quilt her grandmother had sewn, at the sampler above her bed. This life, this predictable, safe existence, was now behind her. A new path lay ahead, uncertain and daunting, but infused with a fragile, fierce hope. She lifted the small bag, its weight a promise of freedom, and walked out of the room, leaving behind the scent of beeswax and the ghosts of expectations. Beyond the fence, the gravel crunched under Sarah's worn boots, each step carrying her further from the familiar world she'd always known. Her small satchel bumped against her hip, containing little more than a change of clothes and the tattered hymnal her mother had given her years ago. The setting sun cast long shadows over the fields, painting the ripening corn in hues of orange and gold. Behind her, the white farmhouse, the barn, the buggy shed, all receded, shrinking with every forward stride. She didn't look back. Thomas walked beside her, his large hand enveloping hers, a warmth she hadn't realized she craved until now. His grip was firm, a silent promise of support that resonated deep within her bones. He hadn't said much, just a quiet, "Ready?" When she emerged from the side door, her chin set with a resolve she hadn't known she possessed until that moment. She'd merely nodded, her voice caught somewhere in her throat, a knot of fear and exhilaration tightening her chest. The long dirt road stretched ahead, an unknown path winding into the twilight. A cool breeze, carrying the scent of cut hay and distant rain, rustled the leaves of the maple trees lining the lane. It felt like a cleansing breath after the suffocating weight of the past weeks. The silence between them was not empty, but full. A shared understanding, a quiet strength passing between their clasped hands. Sarah risked a glance at Thomas. His profile was etched against the fading light, strong and reassuring. His hazel eyes, which had first sparked a tremor in her carefully constructed world, were fixed on the horizon, unwavering. They walked for what felt like hours, the rhythmic scuff of their boots on the gravel, the only sound breaking the evening's hush. The initial surge of adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by a profound sense of calm. The fear of the unknown was still a whisper, but it was drowned out by the louder, clearer voice of a hope she hadn't dared to entertain before. She thought of Jacob, his wounded eyes, her family's distraught faces. A pang of guilt, sharp and quick, pierced her. But it was fleeting. This path, however uncertain, felt undeniably right. It was a truth that bloomed within her, vibrant and resilient. Years later, Sarah watched Thomas from the porch swing, a gentle smile playing on her lips. Sunlight streamed through the leaves of the old oak in their yard, dappling the grass where Thomas sat, a small, dark-haired boy nestled between his knees. Their son, Samuel, was barely 5, his brow furrowed in concentration as Thomas guided his small hands, teaching him the delicate art of carving wood. A tiny, misshapen bird began to emerge from the block of pine, each careful stroke of the knife a lesson in patience and precision. The scene was a tableau of peaceful domesticity, far removed from the austere simplicity of her childhood home, yet imbued with a richness she'd never imagined. Their small cabin, nestled in the foothills, was modest but filled with the warmth of shared laughter and quiet understanding. There were no buggies here, no bonnets, no rigid rules governing every aspect of their lives. Just the boundless sky, the whispering pines, and the unwavering love that had defied every expectation. Sarah remembered the arduous journey, the initial struggles, the moments of doubt that had threatened to overwhelm her in those early days beyond the fence. The world outside was vast and bewildering, full of noises and customs she didn't comprehend. But Thomas had been her anchor, his quiet strength, a constant reassurance. He'd taught her to navigate the complexities, to find her voice, to trust her own instincts. And in doing so, he had shown her a freedom she hadn't known she lacked. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun soak into her skin. The sacrifices had been immense, the severance from her past, painful and absolute. She'd lost her family, her community, the only life she'd ever known. But in return, she had gained something immeasurably precious, herself, and a love that was not bound by tradition or expectation, but forged in the crucible of choice and shared courage. Opening her eyes, she watched as Samuel let out a delighted squeal, holding up his fledgling bird for Thomas's approval. Thomas ruffled the boy's hair, a rare, tender smile gracing his lips. It was a sight that filled Sarah with a profound, unshakable peace. The road had been long and winding, but it had led her here, to this quiet haven, to this family built on a foundation of genuine affection and unwavering commitment. Her heart, once tethered by duty and fear, now soared, light and free, knowing that true love, in all its unconventional beauty, had indeed found its way.